Alexa, play Dhvani Podcast by Parth Chauhan.
Here's Dhvani Podcast from TuneIn.
A few people wrote to me that it's good that you're promoting the idea of podcasts like this, but giving 20-30 minutes and often up to an hour to an audio seems like a big commitment. And that is absolutely right. Considering the low attention spans that we have today, selecting the right podcast is definitely still a difficult task. So I thought maybe I will tell you about some of my favorite podcasts that got me into the groove. Joe Rogan's show is very popular because of the big shots he usually calls in his studio, the controversies he talks about, his interview style, and he has been doing this for a long time now. Spotify recently bought his entire show for $100 million. So you can imagine there must be something very valuable there. While that is just one person, on the other hand, there's a network called This American Life that has produced and continues to make some of the best audio shows in the world. So you can definitely look at both of them. You might find something interesting for you. But still, it is often not so easy to select something just from the cover art or title. So in this episode, I will be talking about 5 of my favorite shows with one special mention. All of them are unrelated to each other, different topics, genres. You might find something suitable for you. Number 1, Serial. So back in 2014, this show was recommended to me by a friend. He told me that once I start listening to it, I won't be able to stop. It is so interesting. And I found that very absurd because I was skeptical for an audio to be so binge-worthy. But trust me, this podcast has changed that perception completely for me. The first season of Serial is about a true crime. Also, this particular podcast is often considered as one of the first and best podcasts on true crime that has been ever made. It basically started off this genre of true crime in podcasts. It's about a first-generation American boy born to Pakistani parents who was charged with the murder of his ex-girlfriend who was of Korean origin back in 1999. He was convicted, charged, and eventually jailed for life. The creator of this podcast, Sarah, started this sort of a reinvestigation of this case in the capacity of a journalist. And through her interviews and research, she was able to uncover so many loopholes in the entire story that not only led to an unprecedented popularity of this podcast, but the boy got so much support of the people and attention of authorities that his case was reopened after 15 years of his imprisonment. That's how powerful this podcast is. Apart from the movie-like drama, the show highlights the problem in the judicial system in the US, the issues of race, ethnicity, and most importantly, how policing works in America. Because today it has grabbed the world's attention after the killing of George Floyd. Season 2 and 3 of the show are equally engaging. Please listen to this amazing podcast by Sarah Koenig, produced jointly by This American Life, and thank me later. Number 2, Today Explained by Vox. Now, if you're a fan of this YouTube channel called Vox, or of this show called Explained on Netflix, then I'm sure you're going to love this podcast because these people are doing the same amazing job here. For the people who don't know about Vox, it's a news agency started by a journalist called Ezra Klein with the idea of explaining the news, which I believe is so relevant today with all the misinformation and fake news that goes around. One of the best things about their content is how they use music, motion graphics, and infographics to explain the news. It is so fun and interesting that you actually like understanding the news. The host of this podcast is Sean Rameshwaram. I really enjoy listening to him. Unlike mine, there's an entire team that works on this podcast. They post an episode daily from Monday to Friday, which is an amazing thing. And if you are interested in a daily dose of news and issues that are happening around the world, this is the podcast that you need to follow, hands down. Number 3, Rocket Ship. Now, this one might not be interesting for everyone, but let me tell you why I find it very interesting. This show is hosted by 2 guys named Michael Saka and Michael Del Cito, who are entrepreneurs, started their own companies at some points, failed at some of them, succeeded at some, and in the process, they networked with a lot of people, and eventually they started off discussing about the startup space, entrepreneurship, brands, their journeys, etc. There are so many interesting stories about the brands we interact with on daily basis, like why the first iPhone was such a secretive project within the company. Why did eBay or Google Plus fail? They talk about the journeys of Instagram, Asana, and many other similar intriguing stories like that. It is actually quite interesting to know about this journey that companies go through to survive and thrive. If you are a nerd about such information like me, you would definitely like this show. Number 4, Drilled. Drilled is about the systematic denial of climate change and how it runs across the entire world in some or the other way. You know, there are these movies, research papers, and news articles that claim climate change is bullshit and everything has been happening naturally. It is so interesting that some people always somehow find opportunities on the wrong side of the argument. Amy Westervelt tells about the history of this climate change denial, which is almost more than 100 years old in the US now, and started off along with the tobacco industry. The climate deniers basically use the same playbook like the tobacco industry to push their agendas in subtle ways by gradually conditioning our minds to believe that oil and gas are key ingredients for a nation's development, success, and growth, while conveniently hiding the damage that it does to the earth and people's health. Like, for example, the very idea of cleanliness and how individuals are supposed to keep their surroundings clean was actually a propaganda driven by these industries that were pushing packaging into the markets in the mid 60s and 70s. Now, if you think about it, you'll see how smartly these biggies pushed their problem of garbage onto us. This show is full of such information. Please make sure to listen to this very eye-opening podcast by Amy Westervelt. Number 5, The Devdutt Patnaik Show. I'm a huge fan of Devdutt Patnaik and his writing. He has done such an amazing work of reinterpreting the ideas and concepts of Indian mythology because it makes so much sense. Like, he connects the characters of epics like Mahabharata and Ramayana and their traits to modern concepts of corporate management and leadership in such a logical manner that it just blows my mind. He is an author and writes his take on all these different stories of mythology, often giving them a modern outlook. In this podcast, which is more of a radio show from Radio Mirchi, he usually picks one story or topic from the Indian mythology and explains its relevance in today's context, and also talks about how it might have been perceived and understood back when it was written. And not only all this information and knowledge is entertaining, but it also gives a lot of hope about how mythology, rationality, and logic can coexist. So many mythological beliefs and ideas are just accepted in the absolute without any questioning or logic whatsoever. On the other hand, they are just uprightly rejected by branding them as superstitions. There is actually a midway, and Devdutt shows us exactly that. I also want to mention about this very special show called Ummeed by our very own Zakir Khan. Unlike his usual comedy stuff, he talks about some serious and very relatable things in this podcast, and you can listen to it on the Gaana app. Except for Serial, I have listened to all these shows on Stitcher. They all are available on Apple Podcast and Google Podcast. I have also given the links of all these podcasts in the show description. Hopefully you'll find something of your liking. If you have a favorite show, please let me know by writing email to info@dhvani.co.in or logging on to dhvani.co.in/podcast. You can also send me voice notes on Facebook or DMs on Instagram. All these details are there in the show description as well. This show was produced, written and hosted by me, Parth Chauhan. You heard Shubham Rai in the starting as the owner of the Amazon Echo. The theme music was composed by Q-Tip by Honey Bunch, and the branding was done by Soumya Garg. Dhvani Podcast is available on all major podcatching platforms including Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, Savan Jio, and all the other ones. You can also play it on Amazon Echo now. Just say, Alexa, play Dhvani Podcast by Parth Chauhan. See you next time. Till then, to jeans.
Here's Dhvani Podcast from TuneIn. Resuming 1.4 Socho, Irfan with Naman and Shaurya.
मैं था, मैं हूँ और मैं ही रहूँगा.